Today's lecture in our seismic stratigraphy course, we will talk more in detail about seismic interpretation. The first slides I will talk about the steps in the stratigraphic interpretation, and they are around like from 10 to 12 points. Then we will go in detail about the seismic interpretation process. The first step is to determine the vertical and the horizontal scale of the section. This is very important because we have, the horizontal scale is in meter, and the vertical scale is different in time, of course. So we have to be very careful about that. Second, we have to check if this data is migrated section or not, if it is marine or land data. Then we need to identify the multiples and mark them in light blue by convention. I mean, they usually mark those multiples in light blue. The next step is to identify and mark the reflection terminations. We have studied that before, the terminations or unconformities, and we learned about examples of this like on lap, down lap, truncation, etc. And we have to put some arrows to point to those terminations, as we can see from the figure here. So you can see top lap, down lap, and you have those arrows just to mark them. And then also in figure B you have on lap, and C you have on lap, and again on lap one more time, and in the last one D you will see the angular truncation. Next step is to identify the seismic surface on the basis of reflection terminology. So once you know the reflection the terminations, you can tell what kind of seismic surface. So seismic surface here is a line on a seismic section where reflections terminate. Once your reflections are terminated, you can say this is a seismic surface. Same as we can say in geology, this is a bedding surface. Okay. And mark seismic surface in yellow color by convention. By convention means usually they use that in oil in companies. So we have to mark the seismic surfaces in yellow color, and next step, assign a specific color to individual seismic surface. I mean, like if you have different several seismic surface based on their type, like sequence boundary, give it a color, transgressive, give it another color, and maximum flooding surface, give it another color, and you have a legend for that. Okay. Next step is to identify the sequence boundaries. They usually, marked by truncation or on lap, and the maximum flooding surface are commonly marked by down lap. We will carry out similar exercise on other intersected seismic lines. This will be repeated, and we need to link together the seismic surfaces and interpretation. So we have to ensure that the interpretation is consistent where lines cross. Where the lines cross each other, we have to have those surfaces consistent for the same event. Next, we will map the sequence unit on the basis of thickness. We will check the thickness everywhere. So similar thickness, we can tie them like correlation. So based on thickness and geometry and orientation and other features, to see how each sequence relates to neighboring sequences. So you will have a nice figure you will know more about the sequences. Then we will identify the seismic phases for each sequence. And last step is to interpret the depositional environment and lithophases. These are the steps in brief from 1 to 12 to know about the stratigraphic interpretation. Now, let's go deeper. So let's now talk in detail about the seismic interpretation. And if we define this process, the seismic interpretation itself, it is a science, or sometimes we call it art, of inferring the geology at specific depth from the seismic data. So you have your seismic record, seismic data, and you need to guess what kind of geology is this. Okay, so the interpretation here will require you to have like drawing, and requires that you have a geological understanding of this area to allow you, to give you the power to pick the most likely interpretation from many interpretations that these data will allow you. Yes, you can have many interpretations. If you don't know, if you don't have a good information about the geology of this area, you will be confused. So, the seismic record that we have after processing usually contains two basic elements. Do you remember those elements? The first element is our travel time for the signals. So the time of arrival of any reflection or even refraction or any event from geological surface, this actual depth to the surface is a function of thickness and velocity of overlying rock layers. The second element is the shape of reflection, and we have talked about that many times, the configurations, the patterns. So the shape of the reflection, which include how strong the signal is, what frequencies it contains, and how are these frequencies distributed, and other information, continuity, amplitude, all this stuff. So the two elements that will help or aid me to good interpretation are time of arrival and shape of the reflection. Okay? This information can often be used to support conclusion. Yes, it will give me a support to say about the lithology and fluid content of the seismic reflector that we are evaluating. Don't be confused. This is the same thing that we have discussed before about the configuration, amplitude, the continuity. Any parameter of those will give you an indication about a specific thing, like lithology, like fluid content, like other features of depositional environment. And the interpretation can be divided into three categories here. Yes, you have structural interpretation, you have stratigraphic interpretation, and you have a lithologic interpretation. Three categories under the interpretation process. Okay. So the first one is the structural seismic interpretation. And from its name, it will really take you to create a structural map, because it's a structural seismic interpretation. A structural map of the subsurface from the observed three-dimensional configuration of arrival times. Good. Second category is called seismic sequence stratigraphic interpretation, or seismic stratigraphy, or stratigraphic interpretation. And in this category, this category relates the pattern of reflection. that we have discussed before, to a model of cyclic episodes of deposition. Yes, each pattern of reflection will give you an idea about the episode of deposition, environmental deposition, the environment of deposition. And this second category has an objective of developing chronostratigraphic framework of cyclic genetically related strata. It will give you which one is older than which bit is up, which one is down, stuff like that. So this is taking care of stratigraphy, and the structural seismic interpretation is taking care of structure and structural maps. So third category is the lithologic interpretation. And here, this interpretation determines the changes in pore fluid, porosity, fraction intensity, lithology. Yes, because it discusses the lithology features, the lithology characteristics. So it will give you an idea about the change in pore fluids, the value of porosity, the fraction intensity, lithology, and so on. And that can be inferred from our seismic data. This directly will take us to the hydrocarbon indicators, DHI, direct hydrocarbon indicators, or hydrocarbon indicators directly, which is HCI, bright spots or dims out. We will not talk about that in detail now, but because we don't have enough time. But these are the elements employed in this lithologic interpretation process. So we have an idea about those three categories of seismic interpretation: the structural, the stratigraphic, and the lithologic interpretation. Okay, this is enough for today, and inshallah, next lecture will include more about the steps of seismic interpretation. Until this time, I hope you enjoy your time and study your lectures carefully, and have a nice day. Bye.